So folks, welcome to the next webinar of TiE Mumbai. I have Rajesh Sehgal, board member of TiE Mumbai and managing partner of Equanimity. Rajesh, over to you. It's your show.
Hi, thanks, Lorraine. Hi, everybody. Good morning, evening, afternoon, depending on wherever you sign in from. And it's my pleasure to welcome our speaker today, who's Neelkant Mishra. Doesn't need much of an introduction, but for the sake of propriety, let me highlight a few of his achievements. I can't spend the whole hour talking about him. So just a few of them. As most of you would have read him in various publications. He's a very prolific writer. As a sell side broker, the amount of content that he puts out is unbelievable. He's a co-head for the Asia Pacific strategy and India strategist for Credit Suisse, one of the marquee names in Indian investment banking and broking business. Needless to say, he started his life as an analyst, and he was rated as the best analyst by Institutional Investor, Asia Money polls, and the like. He is, for those of you who may not be aware, he is part of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister now, and he's also been an advisor to a variety of government committees earlier. And he also advises businesses, not just governments. He has been part of the Economic Advisory Council of CII for the past few years. I can go on and on and on, but let me bring in this whole unicorn conversation by letting all of you guys know that Neelkant's background actually is in technology, and he's also been an entrepreneur earlier in his life. Along with having worked with Infosys as a senior technical architect. So he really understands, this whole space. Let me not waste too much time and get Neelkant to share his comments about this whole aspect and the new way to look at unicorns that he's brought about. And once he's done with his opening remarks, we'll open it up to Q&A. I've already received a lot of questions from the audience. Along with me, I also have fellow board members of TiE Mumbai with me who will be pitching in with their thoughts and questions, etc. later on. So for now, Neelkant, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Rajesh. That was a glowing introduction, so I hope I can stand up to that. So thank you everyone for joining in. It's absolutely a privilege to be talking to you. You are pretty much what makes me very excited about the Indian economy, the kind of dynamism that we have seen, and I expect to see going forward. So I think that we are at an inflection point. I keep saying that this transformation in India's corporate landscape we are at an early stage of that transformation. This is not a late stage transformation. There will be, boom and bust cycles in valuation. We may be going through a boom right now. A bust will also come, but I think the slope is upward, right? So we are seeing higher highs and higher lows, and that's the way to look at it. Not that this funding environment where people are getting $300-500 million, every other day, will persist. I don't think it will. But if you're thinking 5, 7, 10 years, I think it's a great time to be setting up new businesses. So I will, in the next 25 minutes or so, I will, talk about 4 key. I mean, this is my speech will have 4 key parts. The first is just a description of what we did. So to identify these 100 plus unicorns. The second is to understand what the enablers have been, the generic enablers, and why is it that we are suddenly seeing this spurt in unicorns. The third will be sector specific changes. So there are key changes happening in software as a service, in pharma, biotech, in e-commerce, in fintech. So there's a lot of sector-specific change, which is also catalyzing the. And then we will take a more futuristic and wear a hat. So far it's all backward looking, but then what does it mean going forward? Now, see, there are countries which have more unicorns than us, right? So there are, in China, there are more unicorns than us. in the US, there are many more unicorns. I think the important lesson for us here is that in China, for example, there are more than 2,000 companies which are listed, which are $1 billion plus. In the US, there are 2,800 companies which are listed and are $1 billion plus. In India, we only have 335 companies which are listed and are $1 billion plus. So the private ecosystem, which is what unicorns are all about, is now becoming really significant when it comes to comparison to the listed space. Now, this is reflecting what is a global trend, right? So the global trend is that a lot of activity is starting to shift to the private system, the private landscape. Earlier an Amazon could get listed when it was $1 billion, in the 90s. But now you have a Stripe, which is $95 billion in valuation and is still private. So the rise in private equity has shifted a lot of the funding, a lot of the investing to actually the private system. And in many ways, India is benefiting from that, and is also, I think, is going to keep benefiting, and we'll see that later. Now, the interesting thing for me when we started this project was that this was triggered by in a CII Economic Affairs Council meeting. One of the speakers said that we have 25, 30 unicorns. By the end of this year, we will have 35, 40 unicorns. And I thought that maybe it's time to do a more rigorous analysis and go out exploring. So we were very surprised when we found that we actually reached 100 unicorns. And as one cynical observer had asked, and I think it's a very genuine question, 100 is too round a figure to have actually landed up with after a very intense exercise of investigation. So did you bump it up or did you bring it down? And you'll be surprised, we actually had to bring it down. So we cut out many of the firms, and you will find one of them have recently got funding as well, and we knew they were getting funding, and yet we excluded them because we didn't understand their business model. There are firms like e-grocery firms which are potentially exploring SPACs in the US, and that could be at $1 billion plus, but again, we have excluded. So towards the end, we were shedding names. We were finding excuses to keep the count at 100. But that, I think, was an exercise in futility, because after we published, we have been told that there are at least 15 names that we have excluded, which even on our more conservative sort of standards, we should have included. So, and then of course there is the gupshops of the world. So I think this number is rising very rapidly, and I think it's becoming more and more meaningful for the rest of the economy. The interesting thing is, this is also a very highly diverse sectoral mix, right? So it is not just the traditional e-commerce, fintech, the mobility, the food delivery, all of these things that keep making headlines, because there are new generation logistics companies. There are companies, as I said, software as a service. There are companies in pharma and biotech, which we had not expected to see. There are companies in industrials. I mean, there's a company called Medha Servo Drives, which I had never thought had scaled up so much. So these are and these are coming up in a variety of industries. And we must remember that unlike the US and Europe, where nominal GDP growth is about 3-4%, maybe 5%, in India we've had 13-14% nominal GDP growth for 2 decades at least. And what that means is that to go from zero to a unicorn, $1 billion, you can do that even in a traditional industry if you have some innovative product, if you are taking advantage of the process of formalization, if you are taking the process of some sector which is seeing some deepening of penetration. So this is something that it makes India stand out. I mean, you will not find such companies in the US or in Europe, because these are mature economies. So you need the setup of technology to be able to grow. So it's a very diverse ecosystem. It is also a very new ecosystem, right? So 2/3 of the companies in our list started after 2005. Just for perspective, in the BSE 500, there are only 63 companies that have started this century. So very contrary to the fear that many people have had, that this is an industry, that our industry is becoming too concentrated, that there are a few large businessmen which are dominating the landscape. Instead, we have now more than 100 businesses which are worth more than $1 billion, some worth 30-40 billion dollars as well. And I think the lesson from that is that, and I must tell you the filtration criteria we used. We have excluded all the companies that belong to a business group, because in many ways, the exploration has been about new first-generation entrepreneurs who do not have a backing of a large business group, right? So if you are a big automaker, before 1991, and you had certain amount of wealth, and you had, of course, a growing family, so you could make a sugar company out of it, you could make a finance company out of it, you could make an almond oil company out of it. But what if you had no one to back you, right? And this is the fascinating part, that all of these companies are of that group, right? So we have excluded infrastructure and construction companies and large business groups, right? So we have excluded those for that very reason. So very interesting was still fairly the new company formation was very strong. The pace was very strong. In fact, there was low teens growth CAGR in all of the 1980s. The problem was that they were forming at a very low level of startup capital. Because see, risk capital in a low wealth country like India. So India's total wealth per capita is like $14,000, and most of it is stuck in houses and the shop that some shopkeeper works in, or gold, etc. So if you don't have financial wealth, how do you get risk capital? And this is something that has been addressed by the advent of private equity. To give you another example, I was recently reviewing a book which is not published yet, so let me not name the book or the company. A very large dairy listed company, and the promoter started as an ice candy manufacturer, right? And in a city where he started, it was like 350, and in a city where he started, it was like 350 companies. So over 50 years, he has grown from that scale to $2 billion plus in market cap, and a lot of it has been because he took on a lot of debt. And every few years there would be a very risky episode where things tightened and he had to do something desperate to get out of it. So if you don't have a lot of risk capital, you have to necessarily take on a lot of balance sheet risk. And that was the reason why very few companies could scale up so fast. But this is changing, right? So in the private equity space, we've got more funding in each of the years in the last 10 years than from the public equity space. So which is why the private space is actually becoming bigger and bigger. In many ways, this is a global phenomenon. For those of us who have been involved in the listed space, we've all been waiting for asset allocators to switch from bonds to equities. They've actually, so their response to lower bond yields has been to actually switch to alternative assets, and which is why private equity has become much more important globally. In fact, the number of listed companies in the US since 1995-96 has actually halved, right? And a lot of the activity has moved to the private space. So this is a global phenomenon, though of course India's share of global private equity has been inching up. Why has this happened? So over and above the fact that private equity, is providing the risk capital, which is allowing entrepreneurs to chase their dreams, it is also a much more connected economy, in the sense that India's economy 20 years back was mostly disconnected from the mainstream world, right? So if you when I was in Hindustan Lever and I was doing my management training in '98 in a village in Etah is in Bundelkhand, southwest UP. Those people could have been in any country. There were no roads, there was no electricity, there were no phones. They had no idea how the chief minister was, no idea how the prime minister was, and they were just existing, right? And it was very stable. Their lives may not have changed. Once in a while, some tax collector would come whose skin color would have been different, but otherwise it was the same. In the year 2000, only 54% of India's habitations had access to all-weather roads. In the 2001 census, only 54% of households had, actually 56% of households had access to wires. Forget about how many hours of electricity they had. Teledensity, especially rural teledensity, was actually 10% even in 2008. All of these problems have been addressed. Now, smartphone penetration is 38%. I'm sure you're using all of these statistics, so I'll spare you the details. But basically, computing is now available in people's hands. Markets are more accessible. And it takes a while. You build a road, a few years later, electricity reaches, then a few years later, phones reach, then data reaches, then people start living in the villages, then a shop comes up, and then the truck starts coming to deliver, right? So that's how the market expansion happens. Takes a few years, but now I think we are getting there. The number of habitations connected by all-weather roads is now 99%. I would say 100%, but there must be something missing. There is every household now at least has a wire going into their house. Even in rural UP, the target is to get 18 hours of electricity, right? So many of the basic things, like in China, the penetration of washing machines and refrigerators in rural households is 90% plus. You can't have that if you don't have electricity. And this allows for automation to happen, induction cooktops to reach, and that's when the productivity starts to go up. So all of these changes have been happening. In the financial ecosystem, the India stack is now coming of age, right? So if you remember, we were very excited when the JAM Trinity came up, right? So Jan Dhan, Aadhaar, mobile was supposed to give financial access to everyone. Of course, solution had to be built on top of that. So UPI first came, and now we are seeing the account aggregators, and it's very possible and unlikely that in the next year or two, we start seeing a very rapid surge in loans backed by just the data or the transaction data. And that's the interesting thing about many of these startups, that the innovation that you are also bringing about, is that it's not just creating wealth for the people doing that, right? So there are unicorns coming up in fintech, but more importantly, they're also enabling other businesses to grow, right? So if you give credit, and the number of clients for wallet companies, the number of clients for some of the fintech companies is significantly higher, and in some cases 2x the number of clients for the largest Indian bank, right? So in terms of seeding the habit for dealing with money on a phone, which is a huge behavioral change, has been achieved, and now apps can be built on top of that. So this is something that, and India also has a very healthy public digital architecture, which is allowing for all the things like UPI and digital lending to grow. In things like edutech, the market was so far people thought only about the Indian market, but now I think the export opportunities have also opened up. I was listening to a webinar by some VCs, and it was fascinating how they're talking about how this in 1995 who would have thought India will make software for the rest of the world, and just like that, are we underestimating the opportunity for educational content made in India to be delivered to all English speaking or similar speaking areas. The Indian ecosystem, of course, is exploding, but there is a much bigger opportunity in the export ecosystem as well. Similarly, when I look at software as a service companies, I think the nature of software development has changed. When I was a senior technical architect with Infosys, we all worked with Corba and application calls and all that. But what cloud and the fact that companies are now used to not having in-premise server software and hardware, it means that paying for cross-company calls is becoming more common, and therefore how software is developed, how it is maintained, and how it is sold is all getting transformed, and that brings out very new opportunities. Many companies that I know, some of course started by my friends, and they have kind of stumbled into software as a service. I think these are all very happy accidents, and now what we are seeing is that these firms are really exploding, right? In terms of the number of people they hire, they are creating pressure on the cost of good quality software engineers. Because if you're an IT services company, your ambition, and I'm not disparaging that ambition, right? It's just that ambition which has brought us to this place where we have 45 lakh trained IT engineers, right? And it's a huge advantage over and above what it does to the balance sheets or the businesses of IT services companies. Any person I know who has started to venture out on his own and set up an e-commerce company has never been worried about how will he find developers to code his app or code his app software, right? So or his website. So the availability of this is something that is a huge advantage for India. And so similarly on the software as a service side, it is becoming harder and harder to differentiate which company started. The world is flat concept is coming up again. To give you an example, a friend of mine, or two friends of mine, started a company in the Bay Area in 2009. It was, I don't know when they listed, maybe 16, 17. It's still, it's now still listed. It's about $5 billion in market cap. So they started in 2009 in the Bay Area. They set up an India Development Center in 2013. One of them decided that he couldn't be CEO, so he started his own company, which again, privately funded. Again, he's now, his company is worth $3 billion. And he started his India Development Center in year one. The fellow who stuck around and he was CEO till last year, he's now resigned and he started his own startup. And on day one, he has an India Development Center. So as we were going through this list of SaaS companies, it was harder and harder to figure out which company was a US company, which company is an Indian company, because everyone is doing development here. Everyone is doing sales in the US. And most of the promoters have Indian names, right? So it's very hard to figure out which company. This is truly world is flat, and which is a great opportunity because all the people who joined that $3 billion company on day one or in the first year itself know that they can develop software which can be valued heavily, right? Aspiration in 2005 used to be just to create the next Infosys. Now the aspiration would be to create the next Postman, right? So I think the ecosystem is very fertile, and I think it is in very early stages. E-commerce, similarly, I don't have to talk to you about e-commerce. I guess you all understand this, but I look at e-commerce as an enabler. See, earlier, if you had a product, and I'm talking about conventional product, not product as in a software product, but suppose I wanted a new, whatever, maybe hair is the wrong thing for me, but suppose a new deodorant, right? And it would be a very challenging thing for me how to sell it. So I may be very good at design, I may be very good at branding, but I may not be very, and I can get it manufactured, right? So custom manufacturing is all, but how do I sell it, right? It took 35, 40 years to get a truly national distribution system. Now there are pipes available. There is a cost, they will demand a higher margin or whatever, but at least that sale is possible. And advertising has become much more efficient. I don't have to necessarily advertise on TV. I can do much more direct advertising. It, on a per impression basis, is much more cost effective. So all of this is causing specialization and therefore much more innovation. And so e-commerce by itself is, of course, creating a lot of wealth and a lot of new business. But I think it is enabling a setup of a large number of firms as well. And same in pharma biotech, right? So I've been a healthcare analyst. I used to cover listed pharmaceutical companies back in 2006. And it used to be an aspiration for many firms that we'll be $1 billion. And the most common complaint was, why do we keep making these copycat companies, copycat drugs? The reality was, if your revenue base is $300 million, your R&D budget cannot be more than $25, $30 million. But and how can you do even a specialty drug? And therefore, the whole ecosystem was geared towards copycats, cheaper and cheaper ANDA filings, cheaper and cheaper manufacturing of bulk drugs, and then for formulations. Now, many of these companies, one of the last things I did in 2010 as a pharma analyst was presented to the board of one of the larger listed companies, because they were already thinking about what beyond generics, because generics are going to get exhausted in 7 years. What do we do? And so some of these companies now have $3 to $5 billion of revenue. Their R&D budgets are in the $300 million range. So they are now really investing in specialty. And so think about the ecosystem, right? So people are thinking innovatively. And that's also a very fertile ground for pharma biotech companies to do innovations. So last segment, what does this mean for us going forward? See, capital, as I said, was a problem. If you look at the capital available per company, paid up capital is a very, very wrong metric, but that's the best we have. So that's what we used in our report. And what was shocking to us was that while the number of companies was growing rapidly, the paid up capital was flattish, right? Through a very high inflation period, meaning that companies were still stunted, right? So they were, if you start at $20 million, if you keep growing at 20% to reach $1 billion is much easier. And then if you start at 2, because then you're adding 30 years of high risk before that. And so that started to change after 1991 as the controller of capital accounts was disbanded. Capital access became much freer. But still, it was limited to a few business groups, as I was explaining earlier. But I think the advent of private equity, as the ecosystem has matured, right? So now we have firms which invest in the 50 lakh, 1 crore space to firms which specialize in the $5 million, firms which are in the $30-40 million, and then the big daddies who can do the $500 million, $1 billion ranges. So that it's much more diverse ecosystem, and therefore all types of firms are emerging. And I think the wealth created because of this is also getting fed into the next round of startups. So some of my friends who have been very successful in this business are also very avid angel investors and venture capitalists. And so very different from a traditional business group where, if you create a lot of wealth, you kind of keep it in the group, and then some nephew or son is then given a line of work, and then you start investing. These are people who are also 40, 45, 35, and they are investing in other startups and as a pure commercial financial transaction, no family relationship. So this is actually a virtuous cycle, right? So if there is $35 to $50 billion of wealth created for promoters because of these unicorns, a lot of it will be recycled into more risk capital for future investments, as well as the private equity firms which are exiting some of these investments will obviously be asked by their LPs to put in more money in India, and I think that's what excites me, that we are still, this is not late stage stuff, this is early stage stuff. I'm also acutely aware that there will be cycles, right? So if you see the history of emerging markets in, like, say, the US in the early 19th century, in the US in the early 19th century, actually you'll be surprised, was considered at par with the emerging countries of Brazil, Argentina, etc. So Latin America, North America was like, if you're sitting in Europe, I mean, like they compare India and Pakistan, it would be, the Americas. Now, of course, the US has come a long way, and Brazil and Argentina have continued to negatively surprise. But every 5-7 years, there would be a debt bust. So a lot of the capital that was flowing from Europe was going waste. There's a funny anecdote of this Scottish explorer who raised a lot of money for a country which didn't exist. There were lots of scamsters. There were a lot of people who were, and this is generally what happens, right? So you may wonder as an entrepreneur that how did that idiot, the other company, doesn't even know how to run a business, and how is he getting funding? This is at a micro individual level, this is bound to happen. At an aggregate economic level, what I can see is that there will be boom and bust cycles. There will be periods where people are very excited and therefore they will overpay for businesses. Some businesses will, because of that, get the right amount of funding when funding is available and then thrive later. And some businesses may not, right? So, and these are early stage businesses, there are risks. But if I'm thinking 5 years, I think the slope will be upward. So that's what excites me a lot. And they are becoming, so these unicorns are becoming more and more important for the macro economy as well, which I've already discussed. So having spoken for about 27, 28 minutes, I shall now take a breath, and very happy to do questions.
Thanks, Nishant. I think we didn't realize time has passed so much, but very interesting thoughts. I still remember in my Templeton days, and we used to deal with a lot of analysts like yourself on the sell side. And very few analysts would actually be original thinkers, right? And you have always been one of those. And I think it clearly shows in this report and this conversation that we are having with you now that there's a whole new way that you've taught us to look at about the changing corporate landscape in India and the unicorns in that context. So we always traditionally, generally, when people speak about unicorns, it's all about startups and technology related companies that reach $1 billion. But I think a very valid point that you make here is that unicorn is not just about technology companies reaching that $1 billion mark, but it can be any company, any founder, any promoter who's been innovative enough and has scaled up his business to that number. One of the things that I think within India, and I'm just sharing my views in this, sitting within India, one of the things that we all miss as investors is that India offers, the whole breadth of sectors where you can invest and therefore where you can build those businesses, right? For example, if you look at many countries, they will have one or two key sectors, right? Maybe it is materials, maybe it is agriculture in some economies. So there will be one or two engines that are driving those markets. But when you look at India, we have amazing amount of sectoral diversity. We have engineering companies which are global, in their scope and also size. IT companies, pharma, real estate, oil and gas, automobile, agriculture, I mean, you name it. And I think that is the broader opportunity that we have. That said, just to tie this with one of the comments that you made, and we all see it that over the last decade or so, private markets are drawing down on much more capital than public markets, and it's not just in India, but it's a global phenomenon. Is that in some way tied to this whole liquidity tsunami that we've seen since the global financial crisis? Every central banker has been printing money, and therefore the risk that I see, and would love to hear your opinion on that, is that as and when this liquidity tsunami recedes, so will the risk appetite of investors. And as risk appetite goes down, then private markets become that much more riskier. So will this whole party come to an end at some point in time? What, just your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So no, great question. I think the propensity of private equity investors to increase their balance sheets is linked more to their desire to generate returns which are commensurate to what their liabilities are growing at, right? So they are facing a very different set of challenges. If the bond yields really go up, what we have seen in the US so far, 0.5 going to 1.6, 1.7, is, I think, a process of normalization. I do not call it a process of, somehow a lot of future inflation and all that. Because if you think about it, we had feared, and I think consensus was that this downturn was going to be very deep and steep one last year. And that meant that rates had fallen a lot. But with the massive, I think there's some, their GDP fell by a few percent points, but they've given 25% of GDP worth of stimulus. The lasting damage to the economy in the US in particular has been a lot lower than had been feared. So if you're going to be able to reach the pre-pandemic GDP path, so suppose you are growing at this pace, upward sloping line for GDP, and you took a notch here, and then you saw a sharp uptick. But the fear was that you will always be below that earlier line. Now, if you're going to be at that above line, then why shouldn't 10-year yields be at 2%? Because they were at 2% pre-pandemic. So this is a part of a normalization process. And they have been at 2% for a while. So if you think about a pension fund, if their assets, if yields go from 2% to 4%, they will be even more desperate to get returns, because otherwise, how do they deal with their liability? So I think this is more to do with the fact that I think growth is a problem, and if so long as India keeps reforming, right? So we haven't discussed all the other reforms, right? So people have asked me, why haven't you focused on labor market simplification, the corporate tax cut, and a lot of other things? Or in this report, we've written extensively about it, like the production-linked incentive schemes. There is a whole new ecosystem which is now coming up, which is in hardware manufacturing, right? So when the government came up with that 1 billion unit number, that India will make or assemble 1 billion smartphones, we all scoffed at it, right? I mean, I was a bit more, slightly more positive on that happening, but I said, no, we are doing 320, 330, we'll do 600 in 5 years. Now, Xiaomi, Oppo, Vivo, all the Chinese firms, BYD, HBG, everyone is setting up assembly units in India. So India could be doing 1 billion smartphones. It's a 1.6 billion unit market. So people have asked, why haven't you talked about that? That is what is going to drive growth in the next 10 years, right? So we are trying to explain what has happened, why we have seen these unicorns. So when I think of this, and so long as we keep doing these reforms, I think India's ability to generate supernormal returns will remain high. And it's that promise, whether we deliver or not. I mean, so the short-term bad, medium-term good, as you know, is the running joke, right? In India for 20 years. But we have delivered, right? So 30 years CAGR is 7% GDP growth. So I think if we keep delivering on that, I think that access to capital, if you're thinking over cycles, will not be a problem. But I do think that this kind of flow of capital that we are seeing, where we have seen like 5 or 7 unicorns in like a week or 10 days, is frothy, right? So we will see a period where for 1 or 2 years, again, there will be a drought. But you have to last the drought, and I think the medium-term outlook in my view, is going to remain quite positive.
Excellent. I mean, this is really good for most of the entrepreneurs on this call that we have, because in the whole of last year we added I think 12 unicorns, and in the last 3 months, the 4th month is still on, we already have 11. So so it's I think it's very timely for someone like you to point out that this is frothy and it's not sustainable. So make hay while the sun shines. So anybody out there who's raising capital, just go and do it right away. That's the message. Before we open it up to Q&A, we have a few people who are keen to kick off with questions. Just one thing on which I needed your inputs, Neelkanth, before we open up. There are 3 factors that your report mentions, and you discuss in detail. 3 factors that have created this very fertile ground for unicorns. Okay, not a fertile ground, but a fertile birthing ground for unicorns. Funding, infrastructure, and regulations. So most of the conversation that we typically have is about funding, availability of funding, lower interest rates, and therefore all of this. A little bit of thoughts on the other 2, regulation, especially in India. How is that helping the creation of these unicorns? And a bit on the infrastructure. You did touch upon JAM and all of that, but some more thoughts, some more color.
Yeah. So see what you need, and this is where I think for a large part of our independent history, and I'm not blaming people. I think we've all learned along the way. We were kind of putting the cart before the horse when it came to growth. I mean, how do you get the economy to grow when people aren't, like, labor is not mobile, right? If people, at a household level, you're not productive. You don't have to read Václav Smil and the Energy and Civilization to understand that unless you use dense forms of energy, your productivity will not improve. If people are using cow dung cakes, and there is a certain charm in eating litti out of cow dung cake, but the point is that's not a very productive way to cook food. And unless you solve that basic productivity level problem, you're not going to solve or you're not going to create that infrastructure. So even Mao's China, right, while they experimented with Cultural Revolution and many disastrous things, the interesting thing is that when Deng Xiaoping started to open up China, the roads were there, right? So the markets could function. And I think when the UP government is building the Purvanchal Expressway, the the Bundelkhand Expressway, the Ganga Expressway, the number of airports is tripling. Can you believe that all of Bihar, with 11 crore people, had just one airport, right? And if you've been to Patna and you've traveled on the Gandhi Setu, which was the only bridge connecting Patna to the northern part, I was once seeing that it's a 4-lane bridge. It was built when in 1980. And one side of the bridge was being repaired. So there was one way up, one way down. I was going up, thankfully. On the way down was one cycle rickshaw puller, heavily loaded with gamla, right? Those flower pots. And there was a huge traffic jam behind it. One airport for 11 crore people, and that's how it's connected, right? So how do you grow? And I think some of those challenges are being addressed. We are seeing massive growth in highways. You see the change because of FASTag. Even Nandan used to talk about, and when he put out that comment about that, everything will be seamless and wireless. We all thought it'll take a long time, but it's absolutely amazing how quickly FASTag has come. And now you must have seen today they're integrating it with GST, etc., to check evasion. So there is a lot of fascinating stuff which is happening on just easing business. And this is very important. If you're running a true blue clean business, the fact that no one can compete with you by cheating on tax is a huge advantage, right? That was not there 15 years back. So now there is a long way to go, right? Our rail infrastructure is still the pits. I think urban infrastructure needs massive reform. But you see, when the Kanpur Metro, when I started doing state budget analysis, and I mentioned that Kanpur Metro is coming up, all my batchmates of IIT Kanpur said, Kanpur mein kaun metro lagayega, right? Why does Kanpur need a metro? It's starting in November 21. Agra Metro is starting in November 21. And unless we think about the top 100, 200 cities as the drivers of growth, and all of these things are happening, each of these is a market. So I think these are changes which, or like say drinking water, right? Think about piped drinking water to every household. If UP is promising to do that till 2020, by 2024, think about the number of girls who can go to school. Think about the number of women who do not have to spend 2 hours a day traveling every day to just collect water. And these are the hours that are saved, which become GDP a few years later. So I think this transformation is also enabling a lot of good opportunity.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Yes. Let me bring in Amit. He's wanting to have some conversation with you. He's the president at iMumbai. Amit, on to you.
Yeah, thanks, Rajesh. Neelkanth, this was incredible. Really loved the chat. I had 2 questions. You can choose to answer both or either, depending on time. One is, Neelkanth, if you look at the unicorns in India, a large proportion of them are still servicing and in the Indian market, right? Compare that to unicorns that are in China, and I was seeing this report, where many of them actually have built large businesses in many, many countries. So that footprint is already there. So my question is, from here on, is it going to be a domestic market play only? That's one part of the question, right? And how do they break out and become global? Because that runway is getting filled up with other players. And second part of the question is, if I look at what's happened in the last few years and pandemic has accelerated, the big guys have got bigger, right? So it's almost like, you have large corporations emerging globally on the tech side. So the tech, highway and infrastructure is literally being managed by the 5 or 6 big giants, including in India, right? We don't have our tech highways being managed by our companies. And then you have the Indian giants emerging, right? What happens to the people below the unicorns, right? What's the scenario going to be in terms of market structure?
No, again, a great question. See, I would say that at least in our list, for the 30-35 list that generally gets touted as India's unicorn list, what you say is right. But when I look at our list, when I see the software as a service companies, all 11 of them are targeting the US market. When I think about the education sector, and I must say that we are in very, very early stages in the education sector. Now, there are capital moats being brought up that, some firms are getting all the capital, they're consolidating and all of that. But the content is still first generation, right? So it is not really innovative content, right? The true machine learning, etc. So I think the opportunity in terms of addressing, now there are apps coming up which are not even pretending to be addressing the Indian ecosystem, right? So they are straight away targeting. If you think about some fine chemicals companies that we've included, the chemicals opportunity in terms of as China sort of seeds space, partly because of the fact that it could be becoming more expensive because of environmental reasons, or also the China plus one strategy. The opportunity for some of the chemicals companies in India to grow rapidly, not just in the listed space, in the unlisted space, we have quite a few of them. So I think the export opportunity out of India is being explored. Now, I think your question was on the technology side. I mean, are we getting, so one of the companies, of course, like InMobi is only in name an Indian company, right? Meaning it is set up in India. It is an Indian company, but its business is mostly global. So, but yes, I think the dominance that some of the Chinese firms have had in terms of scale and technology, in terms of just the balance sheet, right? So Tencent investing big time in all over the world. I think that scale of companies has not emerged, but I won't be surprised if in some of the reasonably well capitalized companies really start to venture out and because I was talking to someone today, UPI, for example. So many countries, like say in Indonesia, I think many countries in Africa, in Latin America, they're all experimenting with the UPI-like concept. So the opportunity for Indian firms to take advantage of things like that is there. So we have to remember that China is at least 15 years ahead of us. So I would not be surprised. I don't see it as a big disadvantage. I won't be surprised if in 15 years, we will also have a handful of firms which are dominant in markets outside of their home market. So that's one. The second question is a very perplexing one, and actually is a very serious one. I mean, I think your concern is very valid. There is a huge problem of the small getting smaller and the big getting bigger because of the pandemic, and I don't see an easy solution out of this other than a natural. Because I don't think policy can address something like this. So it's one of those unfortunate events that happens. If the business is not viable, no VC is going to do national service or charity to go and fund a business like that. So I think some of the consolidation is inevitable, and I think that's happening at an economic level. It's not just in the startups and the tech ecosystem.
Thank you, Neelkanth. Thank you so much.
Thanks, sir.
So Neelkanth, actually taking off from where how you answered Amit's last question, the big and the small and the big getting bigger, etc. The problem. The other aspect that worries some folks here is, most of the unicorns in India, not just unicorns, even the whole, most of the startup ecosystem is funded by foreign investors. Right? And there used to be Chinese earlier, and now, there's the India-China angle there. Therefore, you now have, you're looking more westwards. So is that, in your opinion, some concern, or it can flare up at some time or have some repercussions to have most of these companies funded by foreign capital?
I don't think so. See, this is a choice, right? This is a choice we have made. And if you think about it macroeconomically, there is no other choice to be made. As I said, India at $14,000 per capita wealth does not have the access savings which are willing to take this risk. So emerging markets, when they come out of this phase, right? So how did China do it, right? So in China, it was what we do not want to do, which is socialization of losses and privatization of gains. So companies took on a lot of debt. The companies that succeeded generated billionaires. Companies that failed, the losses were spread over the depositors. Right? So you give 2% to every depositor. Now, it was possible perhaps in a governance structure like China's, I don't think it is possible in India. So we need more risk capital. And we cannot afford to choose the nature of the risk capital. Having said that, the wealth that is getting created now will also get recycled into domestic VC and domestic PE. So I do expect that the proportion of domestic funds going into private equity VC. Also, if $100 was to be invested today, maybe 1995 is foreign. 10 years down the line, that could be 80% or 75%. So the proportion of domestic will keep rising because we'll be becoming a wealthier economy. And in 20 years' time, we could be very much like China because a lot of the cycle is the capital is domestic, which is now sort of recycling.
Fair point. Yes. No, this is interesting. I mean, as you rightly said, we didn't have a choice, because we definitely don't want to go the China way, and our ecosystem is opened up the way it has, which again links, from the private market to the public market. We have a lot of these companies who today have achieved scale in terms of not just valuation but also business, and are now ripe for coming to the public markets. Right. Quite a few of them have also expressed interest and desire to list. The angst that the ecosystem has, and also some bureaucrats have raised, is about whether they list in India or they list elsewhere. And it's a company's choice wherever they want to list, and the shareholders and the stakeholders there. But I think it has some implications for the ecosystem as well. And since you straddle, these two ecosystems very seamlessly, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, the perspective. One perspective is the companies, and the second is the countries. From the company's perspective, if you're running a business where a large part of your business is coming from the US, and if you are going to be the only company of that type being listed here, then the ability of the investor base to deal with that, to spend that much time, right? If there is a very unique business which no one else does in India, so the coverage is naturally lower. Because coverage is lower, investor attention is lower. So it's a natural thing that let's go and list in the US, and you will see many of these companies trying to do that. On the other hand, if your business is primarily in India, I think the desire will be to invest here, because then people can track your business better and all of that. And we are seeing some signs of that. But there is the country's approach, and so there are regulations, and I don't want to get into too much of detail, but which somehow encourage late stage, after Series C, Series D funding. Most companies want to get incorporated outside India, and that's a challenge which I think regulation can address. See, if it is a fundamental issue of, look, I am a software as a service company in a very niche area, so I am providing very, say, high quality or high volume data analytics, and in India, no analyst will want to spend time on that. Whereas in the US, there are already 5 listed companies in that space, so they will get slotted like that. So that, whether your regulation is easy or tough, that company is going there, right? But if regulation can somehow ease that factor, that why are Series C, Series D companies going abroad and getting a Singapore registration and all that, that I think can help. And I think making our financial markets more mature and diverse is also an objective, after all, for the country.
Absolutely. I saw Praveen Bhai having a desire to ask some questions or share some thoughts. Praveen Bhai, are you there? Can somebody unmute Praveen Bhai, please? Yeah. Yes, Praveen Bhai.
You stole my questions anyway, so that's why I put my hand down.
Great minds think alike.
No, just a question. Great presentation, Neelkanth. Do you see, I know we have foreign capital, but are you seeing any trends within the corporate world, apart from the newly formed billionaires, to start looking at the the venture and the the at least the middle level investment level? Are you seeing any trends?
Yep. Yes. So I am seeing that. So unfortunately at this stage it's only anecdotal. So there are business groups which are very active in trying to create their own digital franchises, but more importantly creating or rather buying out some of them, investing in some of them, and being much more active. Like so there's this agriculture inputs company which is saying that can we partner with some agricultural startups to where they can use our data and create more innovative solutions for farmers, which will help us cement our own ecosystem. So I think there is quite a bit of interesting and innovative thought that is coming out in partnering with some of these, and established consumer goods companies have been also in the last 4 or 5 years been fairly active in tracking this ecosystem and working with them. So it's happening. Are they putting capital aside or giving it to private equity funds to invest, say like some of the global tech majors do? I haven't seen that yet. But I think the awareness that this ecosystem is maturing, needs to be partnered with, needs to be worked with, and occasionally invested in, is something that is clearly coming out.
And do you see any soon enough opportunity for the Indian e-commerce system or companies to list in India? You think the regulation or otherwise, or the market sentiment would allow them to list and get a great valuation?
Yeah, I think so. So I think from in my understanding, some of them are actually underway. Yeah. So it depends on how you define e-commerce. Meaning there are a few companies which are technology enabled and in some of the more popular business groups, popular sectors, which so pure e-commerce of say the likes of Amazon equivalents in India. I don't know if the plans are imminent, but I think we keep hearing about it that they would be interested in listing. But there are other $5-7 billion, $10 billion companies potentially which are thinking of listing in India. That's definitely on the cards.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Thanks, Praveen bhai. Another colleague of mine from TiE board, Apurva, has something to talk about.
I think great interaction. Very much in lines of what we also think about India. My question to you is, first time I'm hearing somebody who has talked about unicorn in 18 cities in India. And I was very impressed with the approach, because mostly people talk about Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, unicorn capitals, right? So I want to know, because why you must be doing research, and all this, do you see that in some point of time, 5-7 years down the line, we will have multiple startup cities like Bangalore in other parts of India? And what is your projection in 7 years from down the line, the number of unicorns? How will the startup economy will look like? Number of unicorns, number of semi-unicorn. Now, when we talk about China, we talk about 3,000 semi-unicorn there also. So how will this startup economy look like in 7 years down the line? Because you have done a deep research, probably you can also project something like that.
Thanks. So, one of the reasons why we drew that map in the report was to highlight that this is a much more diverse and fertile ecosystem. Though, to be honest, it wasn't as diverse as I had initially thought. So I had thought that there would be a lot more companies from Trivandrum, from Jaipur, from Bhopal, so I had expected that. I didn't see them. But yes, you're right. I mean, it's not just Bangalore, Delhi. I mean, it is better than what consensus was at, but I think it was still slightly disappointing to me. And I think the reason is very clear. See, so long as if you're running a SaaS company, if you're running any company which has some export business, you need to be in a city which has rapid international connectivity. right? So you can't do that sitting out of Bhopal or Jaipur, right? So you need to be able to fly very quickly. And when you talk to these businesses, that is actually a business need. Similarly, if you are based, if your business requirement is to get access to a certain pool of talent, and there is an industry ecosystem that has emerged in that city. Say it's in Hyderabad and you're doing pharma, or you're doing in Ahmedabad and you're doing pharma, then it allows you to tap into that resource base. But if you're thinking 7 years out, I think this number, you see, in some segments, I think that in 5 years' time, the number of SaaS unicorns is going to be 50 plus, right? I mean, that's just 11 going to 50, in my view. I think that in many other ecosystems as well, like say in edutech, etc., I would say that the number could be, maybe 15, 20 as well. So the overall number could be well above 250, 300 if this type of momentum really drives the business there. Maybe not 5 years, maybe 7 years. But I do think that we will get there. Those kind of numbers are feasible. Though, given that there will be cycles in between, I generally refrain from putting those kind of long-term forecasts out because it makes no sense.
Do you see some FMCG unicorn also coming? Because 82 unicorns out of 500 unicorns across the globe, they're FMCG unicorns. And do you see that happening in India also?
Yeah, so we have a list, and I'm aware of quite a few companies that are in the 300, $500 million range. So the assumption I would make is that 300, $500 million companies in say 5 years time should be. So I do think that there will be quite a few more, which is what is the point of my highlighting that, look, if you have modern trade, if you have e-commerce, and if you have new age logistics companies, right? You don't need to obsess about dealing with 5,000 distributors nationally, right? So you can reach out to a fairly decent market without the hard grind of building and negotiating with the distributors, or losing control of the supply chain, right? If you go through wholesalers, then you have no idea how much inventory is there in the ecosystem and all that. So with these kind of, so as the supply chain, the distribution chain becomes more formalized and concentrated, which actually makes it more convenient and easier for product innovation and branding to happen. Particularly in the food processing ecosystem. So I think the food processing ecosystem, particularly as it deals with the top 10% of the income strata, I think the opportunity for innovation for value add is significant. So I think there will be quite a bit happening there.
Excellent. Thanks, Neelkanth. Before, I think we've spent nearly an hour, but before we let you go, I would like to ask 2 questions about you. Let's share something other than your research. First is if you can share with the audience your reading habits and your writing habits, your discipline about reading and writing. How do you go about the whole thing? That's the first question. And the second is a little more off. It's that, we all have bad days, and this has come from the audience, by the way. Himanshu's asked this question. We all have bad days, and what motivates you on a bad day? How do you deal with it?
So I generally try not to talk too much about myself because I'm generally quite unhappy with my own output. So I don't think I'm a very efficient reader or writer. So I don't know if I'm qualified to give advice on that. I do end up reading quite a bit. So all the lessons that I read about and how to improve myself on reading, we will say that you must build in a discipline of reading like 30 to 60 minutes every day, right? And if you set a target for yourself, that's how it works. Somehow I'm not very disciplined that way because partly it is because I need to be a lot more creative, right? So finish Unicorn Report, and now suddenly I have to now think about my next team report at an Asia level, right? And I'm so increasingly a large part of my reading is related to the projects I take up. So if I'm, for example, thinking about food, so I will think about calories, about food habits globally, food habits in history, and that because it is relevant to my project at hand, it allows me to concentrate on that without feeling guilty that I'm taking time away. Writing as well, as I think that that system one, system two brain and all that. So because writing requires a lot of brain energy, my brain tries to avoid or postpone the act of writing as much as it can. I've seen that pattern. So I try to discipline myself that you write before anyone wakes up, before you open a mailbox, and that's when the timing is the best for writing. Of course, you have a lot of bad days. I mean, in the markets, my primary job is to people are making money in listed equities. So if you're overweight banks, which we are now, and the bank stocks have done very badly in the last 1.5 months, you of course you feel bad. There are calls I've made last year which worked very well, but there are also calls that worked badly. And so I think the best thing to do is keep a very expectation from yourself. I think being too if you think read India's history or look at Greek history or look at Roman history or any other history. History is written in time slots of 50 years. So giving, feeling bad that I had to deliver on this and I could not do it is perhaps thinking should be that, okay, this is, there are 8 billion people in the world. I have a certain role. I'm dependent on others are dependent on me. There is a certain role that I have, that I should crunch this data, give these insights. And like any cricketer, I'll have a good day, I'll have a bad day. So I have to keep doing that. So that's what keeps me going. There will be bad days, there are terrible days actually. But so long as you keep your own ambitions limited, that, I am a cog in the wheel, which people will forget about the moment I resign from this position, and that I have a certain role to play in the economy, that keeps you balanced. So I don't get very happy when my calls go right, and I don't really feel very bad when the calls go wrong.
So you're advocating equanimity then?
Absolutely. I think that's a great name that you had.
Well, thanks, Neelkant. I think we've all had a fabulous time. Last 1 hour has been very productive for all of us. And I'm sure we all have learned a lot from not just your report, but also your thoughts now. So thanks once again. And we look forward to remaining in touch and getting you to speak with our audience more frequently. On behalf of the board, TiE board, let me thank you and wish you all the luck on all your bad days and all your good calls. Naveen, on to you.
Yeah. Thanks a ton, Neelkant and Rajesh. This was a really useful session. And thank you all board members for joining and charter members. We will, of course, share the recording. It will be up on our YouTube within maybe 24 hours. We will send you all the links. And in keeping up with the peer-to-peer forum for charter members and board members, we are going to be coming up with a discussion on SPAC as a new vehicle for raising funds. We've just got an agreement from Amit Singhal, Google, which Praveen Bhai has got us. So we will be doing that in the week of 26th of April. I'll just send you all the final date and time, so all charter members and board members can note that. These are just some of the few events which are coming up. We have a business builder evening with Nayan Patel. Post that, we have, can you go to the next slide? Yeah, we have a cross-chapter, exchange between charter members of TiE Mumbai and TiE Germany. Then we also have Investor of the Month with Vatsal Kanekya, who's the principal and CTO of Hundeck VC. And we have the masterclass for all early stage founders, especially finance for non-finance founders from Sriram Tambe, coming towards the end of the month. So having said that, please do join our Slack. A lot of you complain that we oversend you emails asking you to register for events and programs. So Slack is a beautiful community where things are very interactive. A lot of the entrepreneurs are asking questions and getting answers from within the community. Please join that. There's a good amount of healthy discussion going on there. Having said that, thank you all. And if any of you have any questions, I saw a few more hands raised and stuff. Please do write it to us. We will be happy to relate to Neelkant and get answers for you all. Thanks a ton. And Neelkant, we really look forward to having more sessions with you. So we'll not let you go that easily as well. Thanks a ton.
Thanks, Naveen. Thanks, Rajesh. Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Thanks,
Pleasure being here.
everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.